Hello again, you sick, twisted weather freaks, and welcome to another fun-filled, action-packed, and intellectually stimulating edition of This Week in Weather. I'm your host and meteorologist, DT from weatherist.com, the commander of chaos, the kernel of confusion, the captain of catastrophe, and your weather sex god. So with lots to talk about here this Tuesday morning, 1:30. You're thinking, what the hell is he doing a video 1:30 in the morning? It's not snowing out. It's not a snowstorm. Nothing's going on. Yeah, okay. Not much is going on weather-wise, unless of course you're forecasting grain weather in the agricultural markets. Then all sorts of hell's breaking loose. But I want to do this hurricane stuff for a while, so I know I said I was going to do that Sunday, Saturday afternoon, evening, and then Sunday. There's just so much data to put out there, so let's get right to it. So here's my next image. There's a picture of my smiling face. There's the Twitter page you should follow, the Weather Risk page, Facebook, and then also the Gmail account. So there you go. All right, the image number 3 here. This is Colorado State, and this is from the I think Phil Klotzbach. He puts this together, and you can see the different forecasts and different services. So if you go to scroll down here, if you look at the bottom, you can see this down here is Colorado State. This is Weather Bell, TSR, Judith Carey CFAN. You can see different ones in here. Radiant Solutions, that's MDA formerly. You can different ones in here, NIU. DTN, all these different NOAA, what have you. So all these different ones you can see here. And basically, now this is where we are right now. Obviously, we have 2 named tropical cyclones, and then anything above this red line here is considered to be high activity in terms of hurricanes. Now, these are just hurricane predictions, not the total number of tropical cyclones. So that's on a different page, and I thought of representing that as well, but let's just focus on hurricanes. And as you can see, most of them, there's a pretty big spread here. Some of them, now these all forecasts are back here pretty much March, April, and May, and these forecasts are more recent over here. So there's been a little bit of a shift towards increasing again, but it's a lot of conflicting data here. So originally it looked like we weren't going to see much in terms of activity, and now maybe there's some talk that might be shifting back a little bit. So let's get to this. All right, image 4 here. This is the sea surface temperature anomalies. This is from May, the NME, and you can see that it has forecasted for June, July, and August a lot of really cold temperatures in the tropical Atlantic here. You can see very cold temperatures there, and of course the warm temperatures up in this area here. So that's what that was for. In the next image, this is the same one now for June, July, August. Also in May, you can see here, again, a lot of cold weather in the Atlantic Ocean here, also tropical Atlantic. So that's one of the reasons why people have been downplaying the hurricane season in the Mid-Atlantic region for 2018. This is from May. This is June, July, and August. This is the European climate forecast, and you can see this here. Notice again, very, very cold June, July, and August. Really cold sea surface temperatures. Look at this, way below normal for the tropical Atlantic. And of course, here's our pool off in the central Atlantic Ocean here. So that's interesting. And of course, that continued. As we looked into the next image, August, September, and October. And again, we can see very, very cold temperatures here in the heart of the tropical mid-Atlantic right that way. And of course, off the coast of East Coast and the Southwest Atlantic Ocean, really warm water temperatures, which imply the argument that there'd be more cyclones developing in the Gulf of Mexico and in the Western Atlantic Ocean than in the tropical Atlantic. That term frequently referred to as homegrown type of cyclones as opposed to ones coming off of the coast of Africa. I'm not crazy about the term, but whatever. People use it. That's the term they use. That's the term they use. Let's compare this to the last year. The image on the left here. This is May, as you can see. It's, last year. Look how warm it was in this area. Wow! And now look at the difference. This is 2018 here, and you can see this is end of April, beginning of May. Look how amazingly cold it was compared to this. Totally opposites. I mean, you couldn't ask for anything a more distinct difference. And one of the reasons why we're seeing this cold water is this has been the pattern since December through May, and what's happening is we're getting this constant big high pressure area here in the central and eastern Atlantic Ocean. This is the Azores here, and what's happening is obviously the wind is doing this. So And meanwhile, we have very deep low pressure over. We've had it over the Western Europe. So what's doing is getting upwelling, and it's driving down northeast winds here, which is causing the water temperatures to drop, and that's what's been causing all the cold water. In fact, you can see there's a trend. This is through May 29th. You can see this is the main Atlantic development region, the MDR as we call it in the weather business. You should know what that means. It refers to the tropical Atlantic Ocean, the MDR, main development region. Okay, notice the temperature is just collapsing. And that's one of the reasons why the hurricane forecasts have been backing off to a large degree. We can see here, this is May 12th, and over here, June 6th. Yeah. Um, Excuse me, June 20th, you can see that. So again, May 6th and June, you can see there's not much difference here. The cold water showing a little signs of breaking up a little bit in here, a little bit easing up a little bit, but you can still see there's the super warm water in the Central Atlantic Ocean off the East Coast by Bermuda, and then the really cold water through here. So again, this is the coldest we've seen in May, one of the top 5 coldest in the last 100 years. And the closest analogs are 1990, 1966, 1968, and 2005. And another one, which is also, I just found out, which was 1985. So let's just put that one in here too, 1985. So those are the 4 analogs here. And we'll take a look at that in a little bit. All right, so this is June 14th. You can see, again, this is from one of the folks in Europe, and you can see the ocean water temperatures here. Great site. Severe weather in Europe. If you follow on the Facebook page, you can see this is really shows the cold water relative to normal. Right here, really cold water. There's the developing El Nino right in here. You can see that, and there's the warm water in the Central Atlantic Ocean in this area here. So that's interesting. So, and if we look at we go out and further in time. Now this is 1985, one of the analog years I talked about. And if you look, now this is monthly, unfortunately we can't go week by week at this point, but if you look back, you'll see that 1985 was almost identically cold. And notice again, 1985, this is May, okay, the May here. Notice here the really warm pool here and the cold water there, and that just matches this very closely, as you can see. Yeah, it's a pretty close match, 1985. Now, the other problem is the season is the dust. The upper level image shows the dust here, and you can see the dust. This is as of June 29th, and the one at the bottom is more recent, actually July 15th. So a lot of dust coming off Africa, really tremendous. Now, that's not that unusual in July. The question is the dust going to ease up? That's another big question here. And the other problem is that the bulk wind shear. Now, this is as of June 30th. The CFS for August, September, and October, the main part of the hurricane season, is forecasting, as you can see. Notice the winds here. So the color coding. Let me change my marker here. This is anomalies in the shaded area. So you can see it's actually here in the Gulf of Mexico and the Southwest Atlantic Ocean. The anomalies are a little below normal here, actually, in this whole area. They're actually a little below normal, as you can see. In terms of the winds between 850 and 200 millibars. Now, it's a little above normal in the eastern Atlantic Ocean, so that would make the ideas of systems coming off the coast of Africa suffering from more shear. But when they get into this area, they might develop more rapidly. So that's what that's kind of indicating. And if we look at the latest update from the European, this is the one for July. And again, August, September, October, November, December, but you can see this is tropical storm density, and again, you can see the European model is forecasting, again, below normal activity here and above normal here because of the generally hostile conditions. Now, there have been some changes recently. This is the latest sea surface temperature map anomaly as of June 15th. So if you compare that to, let's say, this, you'll see some differences. There you go. And what's happening is, again, the cold, super cold water, not quite as strongly negatively cold as we saw in this whole area. So that's one bit of a change. And now the issue, of course, is that trending at all. What's the trend on this? And if you look at this image here, you can see that over the past 30 days, in fact, the waters have warmed. This whole area here has cooled, and this whole area here has warmed somewhat. It's not a huge shift, but it's definitely warming. Caribbean Basin is also warming as well. So that's a trend which is interesting to see. And if we look at we can see this long term here. We can see the anomalies changing from September excuse me, from September. June, they're June 13th. Look at the strong negative anomalies here, the super warm positive anomalies here. And this is July 4th. Now, it hasn't been updated recently, but you can see the cold water anomalies are weakening. There's no doubt about that. They are getting closer to normal as we go up. So, we'll see. Could it be this another 1985? That's a real possibility. And we can see this on the MDR. Remember how before it had dropped down to here? And this whole area, how negatively cold it was. Now look at the rise since the end of June. Steady, almost getting back to zero here as of July 11th. So things are definitely trending more up, as it were, and getting closer to normal. And we can see that also here. This compares July 9th and 15th to July 2nd and to July 8th. And we can see a couple of things of interest here. First, the waters have cooled off a little bit here in the Western Atlantic Ocean, but they've definitely warmed up here off the Cape Verde Islands there. And they've dropped a little bit off the southwest coast of Africa. So this is a good sign for hurricane activity. Well, potentially, it's a little better sign than what it has been. And the other thing that's important is the moisture coming off Africa. And this gets overlooked by a lot of people. So let's spend the time talking about this. Now, this is June. This is the rainfall percentage of normal in Southwest Africa. Now, the important thing to notice here is the color coding. And I don't know if that's going to show up on my scale. Let me see if I can move this down a little bit. Change the scale here a little bit. So I think maybe you can see it more now here. Yeah. So what's happening here is you can see the green colors, a light green color is 150 to 200% of normal, really, 120, 150%, mostly in Southwest Africa. So it was okay in June. It wasn't really great. Now here is June 16th to July 15th. Now this is really significant. You can see the rainfall anomalies in terms of millimeters themselves very strong here. And notice the dark blue, light blue here. That's 100, 200 millimeters. That's anywhere from 4 to as much as 8 inches of rain above normal in some of these places in Southwest Africa. So that's a good sign that the rain's definitely picking up. And if we look at this one here, this is again the rainfall anomalies relative to normal. And the dark greens here, light greens, 150 to 200%, 250%, 300% above normal in some portions of Southwest Africa. So that is a very good sign for that sort of activity, that there might be increasing rains here coming up here as we go into the hurricane season. Now this is from another thing from the Climate Prediction Center, and again I use this in my commodity forecasting, so you may not know about this, but this is a useful site, and it breaks Africa up into a lot of different boxes. And this does, you can click on this. They have this for Europe, for Asia, for China, for what have you, South America. But I'm looking at 4 different boxes here in Africa, and one of the things we can see is the rainfall trend. So let's take a look at this and see. Now this is there's 2 of these boxes here, and this goes all the way back to June, and you can clearly see that the rainfall amounts are definitely increasing, picking up above normal. You can clearly see the trend here. It's in June and July, mostly July. You can clearly see that, very noticeable. And again, the other 2 boxes here, clear trend for above normal rainfall starting in late June and continuing into July. So that's an interesting trend. Now, that being said, we do have problems here. This is the European forecast for El Nino. Now we're talking August, September, and October. So as you can see in this area in here, August, September, and October, let's draw a box here, right in this area like that. So most of that is weak El Nino if it develops. Now, as you go into the winter, it looks like it'll be a weak to moderate El Nino, and then it kind of levels off here. So but that's a winter issue. We won't go into that till later on. But I just want to show you that there is indication that we're going to have a weak El Nino. And indeed, if we look at the region 3.4, we can see that it has risen steadily since April and is now about 0.3 degrees above normal. And the sea surface temperatures are quite noticeable. Now they have a new one, this July 1st. I should have posted the new data here, but it's not much different. The one for July 10th or July 12th, you can clearly see big bubble of warm water. Now, in case you don't know how to read this, okay, this is the equator here, and this is looking down. So this is 100 meters, 500 meters, so on and so forth. So El Nino, the water temperatures bubble up whether it's El Nino or La Nina or what have you. They develop underneath the surface and they push up towards the surface. So we can see plus 3 degrees centigrade getting close to the surface. And of course, right over here, this is the coast of Peru, South America right here, and over here is Indonesia. So there you go. But you can see the warm water is definitely coming up. So El Nino is definitely there, and it looks like it's getting there. And this is the latest CFS forecast from July 12th. You can see, again, it reaches a peak around October, and then it levels off into the winter. So that's interesting. Okay. All right, now let's talk about the first tropical cyclone of the season rule. This is a very interesting rule which I've developed, and actually I just caught up. Other people have talked about it before, but I just put it into text so you can follow it along. The first tropical cyclone of the season rule is one of these old-timer rules, and what it says is that the first tropical cyclone of the season, whether it's a tropical storm or a hurricane, will give you an indication of where there's going to be a cluster of activity for the upcoming hurricane season. Now, that being said, the first tropical cyclone of the rule does not say that there'll be no other activity anyplace else in the Atlantic basin, just where there's likely to be a cluster of activity. So let's take a look and see how this works. This is the hurricane season map for 1996. I'm sure many of you on the East Coast remember it, especially in Virginia and North Carolina. So a lot of activity, they came off the Cape Verde, very active hurricane season, and you can see all the tracks that got close to the U.S. and hit the U.S. East Coast. The very first storm is Arthur. And look at the track. Bahamas, Hatteras, out to sea. This is Bertha and Eduardo. Same sort of track. This is Fran and Josephine. Same sort of track. Classic indication set up by Arthur that there was going to be an active East Coast hurricane season. Again, there was other activity in 1996 besides the East Coast. There was activity in the Gulf of Mexico, the Caribbean. But it did indicate that something was going to be active on the East Coast. 2005, we all remember that historic hurricane season. Katrina, Wilma, Rita, what have Sid, Danny, Emily. So let's take a look at it. And this is the very first storm here in 2005, Arlene. Classic Gulf of Mexico tropical storm. Not a big deal, but it told us that something was coming, that there might be a cluster of activity in the Gulf of Mexico. And then, of course, there's Cindy taking almost the exact same track. How about that? There's Dennis. Wow. Then, of course, we had Emily, we had Katrina, and we had Rita, and we had Wilma. 2010. Okay, there's the hurricane map for 2010. What did that tell us? Notice there's a cluster of activity that stayed out in the Atlantic Ocean, and then also another cluster in the Caribbean basin in the Gulf of Mexico. The very first storm of the season was Alex, and look where it hit. The western Gulf of Mexico into the Bay of Campeche, Northwest Caribbean, Yucatan into the Bay of Campeche, western Gulf of Mexico. That was Alex. What about the rest of the season? This is Bonnie, the B storm. This is Hermine, again, western Gulf of Mexico. This was Carl, western Gulf of Mexico, Bay of Campeche. This is Matthew, western Gulf of Mexico, Bay of Campeche. This was Paula, western Gulf of Mexico. This is Richard, western Caribbean, both of these storms. And then also reaching into the Gulf of Mexico. Pretty impressive how that first rule of the hurricane season works. Doesn't work all the time, and there's seasons where it doesn't work at all, but sometimes it does. And it's just one of those things I bring out there and point out to people. Okay, now this slide I presented earlier, and again, 1966 to 1968, 1985, and 2005. Let me just add this in here, 1985. There you go. So I think that's one of the years that we can put that in there safely now. Okay, so what does that look like? 1966, okay. Well, this was 1966, and you can see a lot of activity in the Atlantic Ocean, but not much on the East Coast, and landfall. The first storm was the A storm, Alma, Western Caribbean into the Gulf of Mexico. You see that? See what it did right in here? Let me change marker here because I've got to pick a different color. Let's pick red. There you go. And you can see right up in here. Good. Okay. So that's what that was the first storm. And then 1966, we had Becky out to sea, and then Celia, which did this sort of activity. So there's indication here. And then also for analog, we had Faith, and we had Inez. So again, At the 1966 analog showed a lot of misses, only one storm on the East Coast, and a little bit of activity in the Gulf of Mexico. 1968, again, we were talking about this because of the analogs. Not because of the first cyclone of the year, just the analogs. 1968, look what this showed. A lot of tropical storms, not a lot of big hurricanes. And you can see, notice in 1968, the first storm here was in the Gulf, Northwest Caribbean into Florida, and we can see a lot of Florida, Gulf of Mexico activity here as well. You can see in these two storms, Dolly and Gladys. So, what about 2018? Well, what do we have so far? This is Alberto. First storm, Gulf of Mexico. This is Beryl, and then doing one of these out to sea. And then this is Chris, another one off to sea. Now, the question is, this is a subtropical system. Notice, subtropical system. Does it count as the first one? I don't know. It might not. Maybe this is the first one here. And so maybe Beryl is the first one, which would indicate potential East Coast trouble. Hard to say. So this is one of these problems with the first tropical cyclone rule. Does subtropical storm Alberto in May count? I don't know. There's no set rule for this. We'll just have to wait and see. All right. This here image, this is the European, the one came up for July, the upper air pattern for August. And notice what it's showing here, folks. We're getting a real clear, big, huge ridge here and a trough on the East Coast. You see that? And that could imply activity coming up this way gets pulled into the trough. Could, maybe. And then that's a much stronger signal here for September. Look at that monster trough. That's a pretty big trough on the East Coast for September. That's pretty big. Now, that's going to make for a really great September, but it also potential for East Coast activity, East Coast problems. So there is that. And the reason why that's important is because of this. This is the groundwater. And you can see that generally the eastern half of the country generally is pretty wet, east of the Mississippi River. Not super wet, and there's some dryness in Virginia, North Carolina, but for the most part, the eastern half of the country has been pretty wet. And we can see that also over the last 4 weeks where the rain has been again, the rain generally has been over the eastern half of the country in here. And what that means is that you're likely to get your trough constantly doing this, which is why the European model here showing the trough here and here probably makes sense. So that's kind of important in that regard. And long term also we can see here, this is the drought palmer for June, and you can see also that the dryness is clearly centered in this area in here, and this is where your trough is running. And now recently that started to change. The Midwest has turned somewhat dry recently, but long term you can see, again, these images are more important, I think, with the moisture staying on the East Coast, supporting the mean trough being on the East Coast. And that's where I'm concerned about. So in summary, I would say that, the hurricane season is looking a little better than it did. If you want to see a hurricane analog to really latch onto, I think it's 1985. That showed a dramatic warming in the Eastern Atlantic Ocean, the Central Atlantic Ocean, and we had a lot of activity, including glory on the East Coast in 1985. So there is that possibility. And that would mean that we end up with a fairly decent hurricane season. Not spectacular, but a little more active than what people were saying. I do think the pattern generally supports or favors activity along and close to the East Coast this season because of the trough position. It may be a lot of misses, a lot of systems passing, west of Bermuda, but well off the East Coast. That's a possibility here for this season as well. This is meteorologist DT from Weather Risk. I'll talk to you soon.